He's been a Brit, a Bat, and Ben Affleck? But the concept of Superman as a villain is one that hasn't yet made it to the silver screen, at least properly. As one of the most popular and recognizable superheroes of all time, we have had several interpretations of the character. Turns out you can't just slap a costume on anyone and call them Superman though. You have to somehow reinvent the character to make him appealing to modern movie-going audiences. Thus, Reeves was great as the classic Supes, Routh was forgettable as a copycat, and the jury's still out on a morally ambiguous Cavill. But what if Zack Snyder had given us an even bolder version of the Man of Steel? One where neck snapping is commonplace, and mustaches are twizzled evilly, not digitally removed. In this video, we'll be tracing back the comic book roots of evil Superman, and examining how Zack Snyder came very close to unleashing Clark's dark side. Hey, I said dark side? Not dark side.
Let's be real, a godlike being who has little difficulty in most all situations can get a bit dull. You almost feel sorry for the bad guys for even trying to take on Clark. So comic book writers have experimented a lot over the years to introduce some variety. Silver Age Clark loved a good heel turn.
It's me, Austin! Oh, son of a bitch! What? It's me, Austin! It was me all along, Austin!
And new colours of Kryptonite were regularly utilised to warrant a sudden personality shift, sometimes with hilarious results. There's the more serious gold Kryptonite, which can strip Supes of his powers, but then there's the red variety, which is a gold mine. Becoming a dwarf, becoming a madman, becoming really hairy. Red Cake can do it all. Kryptonite has always been a handy go-to for writers, and showing its inclusivity, there's the pink kind too, which turns you gay. Look, writers back then needed something to make stories out of, and anyway, the effects never lasted long and only ever really resulted in some hijinks. These Rock's temporary effects do mean that DC can play with Supes' characterization without jeopardizing his reputation long term. But what happens when Clark does go all 9/11 times 100 on us?
9/11 times 100? Jesus, that's...
Yes, 91,100.
Ultraman is the earliest example of an evil Superman from a twisted alt dimension. There's also Bizarro, but these guys are distinctly separate characters to the Man of Steel. The likes of Red Sun and more recently Injustice demonstrate how Clark can become a little power hungry, though not out and out evil. Usually this is by way of an ideology shift, with an altruistic Supes deciding he needs to actively intervene to help protect humanity from itself. 'Cause we're jerks. Ultimately this means Clark getting his hands dirty, which is a slippery slope because where do you draw the line? Mind control? A superpowered protection force? Inevitably this means Clark tarnishing his squeaky clean rep and alienating some of his super friends. Most of the time, Batman is used as the yin to Supes' yang, which we saw a little of in BVS, more on that in a sec, but it's also been touched on in Kingdom Come and The Dark Knight Returns. And this dynamic has led to some pretty potent story writing because the problem's turned on its head. Instead of how to make Superman appealing, you're instead asking how you take the son of a bitch down. Not the easiest thing to do when Bats is against killing, most of the time, and the characters that could actually do it side with the Man of Steel.
These comic book ideas have seen some life in the movies, with Superman 3 being the first to give us a naughtier Superman. It's not a great film, the script's lazy, the effects are weak, but at least it wasn't Superman 4. We bring it up because Supes turns bad, a transformation caused by, you guessed it, Kryptonite, or a form of it. This Kryptonite turns Supes into a jerk, and while not outright evil, he does some jerky things. Superman, in his Clark form, eventually battles Superman, in his asshole form, wins, and goes on to right all the wrongs done. It was played for laughs, we think, but we got a glimpse of what could be an off-the-rails god. Superman 3 wasn't the last time we'd see old Blue Balls act like a dickhead though.
Ignoring Superman Returns' spying tendencies, it's essentially a continuation of the Reeves films. The biggest reimagining of the character came in 2013's Man of Steel, where he's not entirely good. Yes, he saves a bus full of kids, but later on in life, he levels an entire city. Plus the whole neck snapping thing. The Superman presented in MOS is a hero, but Zack Snyder tried to bring in a moral grey area to make him more relatable, which was something of a trend at the time, but it's debatable whether Snyder pulled it off fully. Going back to our comic book examples, these versions work because they remixed a fully established version of Supes during a time of crisis. Introducing this idea alongside Clark's origins seems like a bit of a misstep in retrospect, which has caused problems for later DC movies, as we saw in 2016's ill-fated BVS. which was clearly more of a cash grab than a well thought out plan. Instead of giving Batman a proper reason to go after Supes, they basically had to contrive the conflict. And the rest is history. Not to harp on too much about the movie, but imagine if the conflict had been legit, like Bats going after an off-the-rails Supes. And no, not the kind we saw in that dream sequence / flash forward. Hell, even some coloured Kryptonite would have been more convincing. Remember, Martha's the safe word.
Justice League was heavily rumoured to introduce a black-suited bad Supes, but instead we got the mustache removal. Joking aside, it seems by the point Justice League came along, the decision had been made to stop screwing with Superman's characterization. Joss Whedon, probably directed by Warner's, pushed things vigorously in the other direction to maintain Supes as a beacon of hope, apparently. All in all, it's confusing how things transpired. Some argue that this was all part of an elaborate arc for Clark, but for most of the rest of us, Snyder seemingly hit the gas way too hard initially, forcing DC to pump the brakes in subsequent movies, thus robbing us of any proper chance of getting a bad Superman in the DCEU, unless that ever-elusive Snyder Cut fixes the issue. Regardless, it really makes you marvel at the way other studios plan their universes. And yes, we're talking about the X-films.
The idea of a superpowered alien turning bad isn't just limited to Superman. Recently we got Brightburn, a concept that was definitely interesting, but perhaps lacked in execution. The movie is an obvious riff on the Superman tale. A baby alien falls to Earth, and a babyless couple of Kansans take him in. But instead of growing up to value human life, he becomes a death-dealing maniac. To be fair to Brandon, he is kind of programmed by his race to take over the world. Perhaps these aliens saw Justice League? Ultimately, Brightburn kinda ran out of steam, which illustrates the inherent problems when these all-powered characters go rogue. But damn it, it is interesting if done properly. I mean, have you seen The Boys? Anthony Starr is fantastic as Homelander, an unstoppable scumbag version of Superman, and the show makes a great case for compelling superheroes who also bend the rules. So the stage could well be set for Clark to also become a bad guy, though you could argue that given all these evil alternatives we've been getting, the ship may have already sailed for DC to do the same.
Seemingly, Warners want to maintain Superman's rep for future movies, so turning him bad doesn't make a lot of sense at this point, and as mentioned, you'd probably need to kill him to stop him, and we've already had that. But with the DCEU potentially moving into new territory where movies aren't part of an overarching continuity, what's to stop them reimagining their roster of characters everyone is familiar with? We know interconnected movie universes rarely work outside of Marvel. Just ask Tom Cruise. So an evil Superman could be a welcome next step, perhaps in the form of Red Sun? Though we're getting an animated version very soon, so maybe not. If nothing else, Joaquin Phoenix's Joker movie will help justify the switch for the decision makers at Warner's. What with the film playing fast and loose with the source material? It's projected for a $90 million opening weekend, which is no laughing matter. And with JJ and James Gunn heavily rumoured to be taking over the DC creative reins, the future is definitely looking interesting at the very least.
In the shorter term, we'll be getting Brandon Routh returning as Kingdom Come's Superman in the Arrowverse's Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is sure to be a lot of hype for nothing. I mean, it's a cool concept, but does the CW ever convincingly adapt anything? To be fair, Kevin Conroy's finally getting a shot at playing Bruce Wayne IRL, and Tom Welling's coming back. So Walter Hemada and friends will have lots to think about when 2020 rolls around. But come on, if you're gonna do a trench movie, at least give us an evil Superman. At the very least, we hope we've made a case to show Clark can be just as compelling as a bad guy as he is as a big blue Boy Scout. If not more so. And to be fair, Henry Cavill's best role to date was as a corrupt CIA agent in Mission Impossible, so he could be perfect as a bad guy. Assuming he still wants to play the role, that is.
Thanks for watching this video, super boys and girls. If you enjoyed it, you know what to do. Close that tab and forget all about it. If you'd like to leave us some abuse regarding Zack Snyder being a misunderstood genius, be sure to hit the caps lock and shout us in the comments. Alternatively, if you'd like to join our Justice League, you can hit the like, subscribe, and bell buttons, and even check out one of our other videos. Here's a couple of suggestions for you. We've been the Doobie Bros. Cheers.